That was the final scene. The moment 3 lives changed forever. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back. Back to the day Jonathan Ashford-Kent learned the truth about his wife's affair and made a decision that would end in blood. In London's exclusive Belgravia district, some betrayals cost more than money. They cost lives. When 41-year-old Victoria Ashford-Kent fell for her husband's personal assistant, people would discover that in the world of British aristocracy, loyalty is everything and betrayal is unforgivable. If you're fascinated by the dark secrets hiding behind mansion doors and how ambition can turn deadly, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more shocking true crime stories. But let's go back to where it all began, in 2023, when Victoria first met the man who would destroy everything she knew. Victoria Ashford-Kent lived a life most people only see in magazines. The Georgian mansion in Belgravia, one of London's most expensive neighborhoods, was worth £28 million and featured 12 bedrooms, a private cinema, and a wine cellar that housed bottles worth more than most people's homes. At 41, she was the definition of old money elegance. Educated at Cambridge, fluent in 4 languages, and descended from a family whose name appeared in the Doomsday Book, Victoria had married into even more wealth when she wed Jonathan Ashford-Kent at age 26. Jonathan was 62 now, a venture capitalist whose hedge fund managed billions in assets. He had made his fortune during the dot-com boom, survived the 2008 financial crisis, and emerged even wealthier. His connections reached into Parliament, Buckingham Palace, and boardrooms across Europe. At 47, he was one of Britain's most powerful financial figures, and Victoria was his perfect complement, the aristocratic wife who knew how to navigate society dinners and charity auctions with effortless grace. But behind the perfect facade, Victoria's marriage was as cold as the marble floors of their mansion. Jonathan treated her like a prized painting, something beautiful to display but never truly appreciate. He was consumed by his work, traveling constantly between London, Geneva, and Singapore. When he was home, he spent hours in his study, managing portfolios and closing deals worth hundreds of millions. Victoria had become invisible in her own life, a ghost haunting rooms filled with priceless art and empty conversations. They had no children. Jonathan had been clear from the beginning that his legacy was his business empire, not a family. Victoria had sacrificed her own career in international law to become Mrs. Ashford-Kent, and after 15 years of marriage, she had nothing to show for it except designer wardrobes and crushing loneliness. She spent her days managing the household staff, attending charity functions, and wondering how her brilliant Cambridge education had led to this gilded cage. That's when Daniel entered her world. Daniel Mitchell was 29 years old, the son of a schoolteacher from Manchester who had worked his way through university on scholarships and student loans. He was brilliant with numbers, ambitious, and hungry for success in a way that Victoria found intoxicating. His dark hair, sharp jawline, and intense green eyes didn't hurt either. Jonathan had hired him as his personal assistant after his previous aide left for a position at Goldman Sachs. Daniel needed this job desperately. His father had died young, leaving his mother with medical debt, and Daniel sent money home every month to help her survive. The salary Jonathan offered was extraordinary, enough to clear his mother's debts in 2 years and give Daniel the connections he needed to launch his own investment firm. He was willing to work 80-hour weeks, manage Jonathan's impossible schedule, and be available 24 hours a day. From the moment Daniel walked into the Belgravia mansion, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years: recognition. Unlike the other staff, who treated her with distant respect, Daniel actually listened when she spoke. He asked her opinions on art exhibitions, discussed politics with genuine interest, and treated her like an intellectual equal rather than just the boss's wife. At first, their interactions were completely professional. Daniel would brief Victoria on Jonathan's schedule, coordinate household needs with Jonathan's business travel, and ensure everything ran smoothly. But gradually, they began to find excuses to talk. Victoria would ask Daniel to help her review charitable foundation proposals. Daniel would seek Victoria's advice on navigating London's complex social hierarchy. Their conversations stretched from minutes to hours. Victoria learned that Daniel was studying for his CFA certification at night, working toward credentials that would help him break free from being someone's assistant. He spoke passionately about democratizing investment opportunities for ordinary people, creating financial products that serve communities instead of just extracting wealth. His idealism was refreshing in Victoria's cynical world of inherited privilege. For his part, Daniel saw through Victoria's perfect aristocratic mask to the brilliant, trapped woman underneath. He noticed how her eyes lit up when she discussed the legal cases she used to work on, how she would pause mid-sentence when Jonathan called, her entire demeanor shifting to something careful and controlled. He began to understand that all the wealth in the world meant nothing when you were suffocating. Their friendship deepened during the summer months when Jonathan spent 6 weeks in Singapore finalizing a massive tech investment. Victoria was alone except for the household staff, and the isolation was becoming unbearable. She began asking Daniel to accompany her to gallery openings and theater performances, events she would normally attend alone or skip entirely. One evening at the Royal Opera House, watching La Traviata, Victoria felt tears streaming down her face during the final act. The story of a woman trapped by social expectations, dying alone, hit too close to home. Daniel noticed and gently placed his hand over hers. That simple gesture of human connection broke something open inside Victoria that she had kept locked away for 15 years. After the performance, they walked through Covent Garden, talking until midnight. Victoria told Daniel about her dreams of returning to law, of using her position and resources to actually make a difference instead of just writing checks at charity auctions. Daniel shared his frustrations with working for a man who made billions while ordinary people struggled, his growing disillusionment with a world of high finance. "I feel like I can finally breathe when I'm with you," Victoria whispered as they stood outside the mansion. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Ashford-Kent, Please," she interrupted. "Just call me Victoria." That night marked the beginning of something neither of them could control. The invisible walls that had kept them at a safe distance began to crumble, replaced by an attraction so intense it felt like drowning and flying at the same time. The affair that began with a kiss in Kensington Gardens would consume both of them. But in London's unforgiving elite society, some secrets are impossible to keep, and some betrayals demand the ultimate price. Don't forget to subscribe because this forbidden love story is about to take a deadly turn. Their first real kiss happened during a rainstorm in Hyde Park. Victoria had asked Daniel to walk with her, needing to escape the suffocating walls of the mansion. As rain began to fall, they took shelter under an ancient oak tree, and suddenly the careful distance they had maintained collapsed. The affair that followed was passionate, reckless, and completely consuming. They began meeting at a small flat in Pimlico that Victoria rented using cash from her personal accounts. The modest apartment became their sanctuary, the only place where Victoria wasn't Mrs. Ashford-Kent and Daniel wasn't the assistant. They were simply two people who had found each other in the loneliness of London's glittering upper class. Daniel was torn between his feelings for Victoria and his growing guilt. He knew their relationship was not just forbidden, but potentially catastrophic. Jonathan Ashford-Kent was one of Britain's most powerful men, with connections to everyone from cabinet ministers to intelligence services. If he discovered his wife's affair with his personal assistant, the consequences would be devastating. But their secret was becoming harder to maintain. Victoria's behavior was changing in ways that couldn't be hidden. She smiled more, laughed during staff meetings, and took more interest in her appearance. Margaret, the longtime housekeeper who had worked for the Ashford-Kents for 20 years, began to notice. "Madam seems different lately," she mentioned to the other staff. "Happier. Almost like when she first married Mr. Ashford-Kent." The comment reached James Carter, head of Jonathan's personal security detail. James was former MI5, hired specifically to protect Jonathan's interests, both personal and professional. He began paying closer attention to Victoria's movements, noting the unexplained absences and the way she lit up whenever Daniel was nearby. Meanwhile, Jonathan noticed changes in his wife that triggered his instincts. Victoria seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, and showed unusual resistance to his plans for a major charity event. "You seem different lately," he told her over dinner at their club. "More engaged. Are you working on some new project?" "I've been considering returning to legal work," Victoria managed to reply calmly. "Perhaps pro bono cases through the foundation." That night, Jonathan called James. "I need you to conduct a full security review of my household. Pay particular attention to my wife's activities. Something feels off." James had been waiting for this conversation. "I've already noticed some irregularities, sir. Should I begin comprehensive surveillance?" "Do whatever is necessary," Jonathan replied coldly. "But keep it discreet. I won't tolerate disloyalty." The net was closing around Victoria and Daniel, but they were too intoxicated by their newfound happiness to see the danger. The breaking point came when Victoria told Jonathan she was attending a week-long legal conference in Edinburgh. Instead, she and Daniel spent a week together at a cottage in the Cotswolds. Those 7 days were the happiest of Victoria's adult life. They lived as equals, cooked meals together, walked through countryside villages, and talked about impossible futures. "I wish we could stay here forever," Victoria whispered as they watched the sunset from their cottage garden. "Maybe we can find a way," Daniel replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "I have some money saved. We could go somewhere Jonathan can't find us." But James had used those 7 days to conduct a thorough investigation. He traced phone records, reviewed security footage from the Pimlico Flats street cameras, and interviewed staff members. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Photographs of Victoria and Daniel together, records of the apartment rental, evidence of cash withdrawals from Victoria's accounts, and detailed timelines of their meetings. When Jonathan returned from a business trip to Switzerland, James presented him with a report that detailed his wife's affair with devastating precision. Jonathan read in complete silence, his face betraying no emotion, even as rage built inside him. The humiliation was intolerable. Not just the adultery, but that Victoria had chosen his assistant, a man from Manchester who Jonathan had elevated from obscurity. "What do you recommend?" Jonathan asked James quietly. "In situations like this, there are several approaches. We could confront them directly, pursue legal separation, or handle the matter more permanently. I want them both to understand the consequences of their betrayal," Jonathan said, his voice cold as ice. "But I also want to protect my reputation and business interests. A scandal would be unacceptable." "Understood completely, sir," James replied. "Leave it to me." As James left to begin planning, neither Victoria nor Daniel knew their secret had been discovered. They were planning their next meeting, discussing how to tell Jonathan they were leaving together. But their sanctuary was about to become a trap, and their love story was about to become a tragedy that would shock London's elite society. James's surveillance had uncovered everything, and Jonathan wanted more than just evidence. He wanted revenge. When the lovers walked into their Pimlico flat for what they thought would be another afternoon together, they had no idea they were walking into a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story takes a shocking turn that will leave you speechless. James had spent 3 weeks planning the perfect trap. He knew about the Pimlico flat, knew their schedule, knew exactly when they would be most vulnerable. Jonathan had given him simple instructions. "Make them both disappear, but do it in a way that creates no connection to me. I want a clean resolution." On October 14th, 2023, Victoria told her household staff she was attending a museum board meeting that would last several hours. Daniel, having supposedly taken personal time, met her at their usual spot. They entered the small flat laughing, completely unaware of the danger waiting inside. James and 2 of his former intelligence colleagues were waiting in the bedroom. The moment Victoria and Daniel stepped inside, they found themselves facing 3 armed men who had been documenting their affair for weeks. "Mrs. Ashford-Kent," James said calmly, "your husband would like to resolve this situation." The terror in Victoria's eyes was immediate. She grabbed Daniel's hand, but James's men quickly separated them, forcing Daniel to his knees while restraining Victoria. "Please," Daniel begged. "This is between me and Mr. Ashford-Kent. Let Victoria go. I'll take full responsibility." "You both made your choices," James replied coldly. "Now you'll face the consequences." What happened next would become the subject of intense police investigation. James had prepared the scene carefully. The plan was to make it look like a murder-suicide, a tragic ending to an illicit affair gone wrong. But Daniel fought back harder than James anticipated. Despite being outnumbered, he managed to break free momentarily and attacked one of the men, trying desperately to protect Victoria. In a struggle, his phone fell behind a radiator, unnoticed in the chaos. The device was recording audio, a safety measure Daniel had activated when he first sensed something was wrong. "If something happens to us," Daniel's voice would later tell investigators, "Jonathan Ashford-Kent arranged this. James Carter is his head of security. They've been following us for weeks. If you find this recording, look for the evidence James collected. He keeps everything." Victoria's last words, captured on that recording, were a desperate plea. "Jonathan, if you ever loved me, please don't hurt Daniel. He's innocent in this. I'm the one who pursued him." But mercy wasn't part of Jonathan's plan. When it was over, James called Jonathan to report that the situation had been resolved. The scene was staged carefully to look like Daniel had killed Victoria in a fit of passion before taking his own life. The apartment was cleaned of any evidence connecting it to Jonathan or his security team. But James had made one critical mistake. In the violence of the struggle, he failed to notice Daniel's phone had fallen behind a radiator, still recording. The device contained months of encrypted messages between the lovers, photographs of their time together, and most damning of all, the audio recording of their final moments. 2 days later, when Victoria failed to return home and Daniel didn't report for work, the first cracks appeared in Jonathan's carefully constructed alibi. Victoria's sister, Lady Charlotte Ashford, became concerned and reported her missing. Jonathan played the worried husband perfectly, filing a police report and offering a £100,000 reward for information. But Scotland Yard's investigation was more thorough than James had anticipated. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Reynolds was assigned to the case, and she immediately noticed inconsistencies in Jonathan's story. When they discovered the Pimlico flat and found Daniel's hidden phone, the entire conspiracy began to unravel. The investigation that followed would expose not just a double murder, but a network of surveillance, control, and violence that reached into the highest levels of British society. Jonathan Ashford-Kent, the respected financier with connections to Downing Street, was about to discover that in Britain, justice applies to everyone, even billionaires who think they're above the law. The discovery of Daniel's recording changed everything. Detective Chief Inspector Reynolds had investigated murders in London's elite circles before, but this case revealed a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even her experienced team. The audio from Daniel's phone was chilling, capturing not just the final moments, but enough conversation to establish premeditation and conspiracy. Within 48 hours of finding the phone, Reynolds had assembled a task force to investigate what was now clearly a double homicide. The case was extraordinarily sensitive. Jonathan Ashford-Kent sat on the boards of 3 FTSE 100 companies, had donated millions to political parties, and counted 2 former prime ministers among his personal friends. The investigation began with James Carter. When armed police arrived at his Kensington flat at dawn, they found a man who had prepared for this possibility but hoped it would never come. James's military and intelligence training had taught him to keep insurance, and his personal safe contained copies of everything he had gathered on Victoria and Daniel, along with detailed records of his communications with Jonathan. "I want my lawyer," James said calmly as officers placed him under arrest. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic teams found surveillance equipment in James's possession that matched devices discovered in the Pimlico flat. His phone contained text messages from Jonathan with explicit instructions about resolving the problem permanently and discreetly. Most damning were the financial records. Jonathan had transferred £250,000 to James's offshore account in the Cayman Islands the day after the murders, and another £150,000 to accounts belonging to James's two associates. The money trail was clear and undeniable. The forensic evidence from the Pimlico flat contradicted the staged murder-suicide scenario. Blood spatter analysis showed that both victims had been restrained during the attack, not engaged in a struggle with each other. DNA evidence confirmed multiple attackers had been present. Security camera footage from neighboring buildings showed James and his team entering and leaving the flat at precisely the times recorded on Daniel's phone. Reynolds personally led the team that arrested Jonathan Ashford-Kent. They waited until he was at his office in Canary Wharf, surrounded by colleagues, to maximize the public nature of his downfall. The sight of one of Britain's most powerful financiers being led away in handcuffs sent shockwaves through the city. "This is absurd," Jonathan told the arresting officers, his aristocratic composure barely concealing his rage. "I'm a victim here. My wife betrayed me with my own employee." "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder," Reynolds replied coldly. "You can tell your story to the judge." The evidence against Jonathan was comprehensive. Phone records showed 4 calls between him and James in the 3 weeks leading up to the murders. Text messages, despite Jonathan's attempts to delete them, were recovered by digital forensic specialists. The messages revealed a man consumed with rage and humiliation, determined to punish both lovers for their betrayal. Security footage from Jonathan's own mansion showed him meeting with James the day before the murders, reviewing documents that turned out to be the surveillance reports on Victoria and Daniel. Financial records traced the payments to offshore accounts. And most damaging of all, James's insurance files contained audio recordings of his conversations with Jonathan where the plan was discussed in detail. The trial began in April 2024 at the Old Bailey, and it captivated not just Britain but the entire world. The prosecution, led by King's counsel Emma Blackwood, painted a picture of a man so consumed with pride and the need for control that he ordered the execution of his own wife rather than face the humiliation of divorce. "This case is about power," Blackwood told the packed courtroom during her opening statement. Jonathan Ashford-Kent believed his wealth and connections placed him above the law, above morality, above basic human decency. When his wife found happiness with another man, he didn't seek divorce. He sought death. James Carter, facing life imprisonment without parole, agreed to testify against Jonathan in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony provided devastating details about Jonathan's obsession with punishing the lovers and protecting his reputation at any cost. "He told me that Victoria had humiliated him by choosing a nobody from Manchester," James testified. "He said that Daniel needed to understand that you don't take what belongs to powerful men. He wanted them both dead, but he wanted it to look like they had destroyed themselves." The defense tried to argue that James had acted beyond his authority, that Jonathan had only asked for surveillance and James had taken it upon himself to commit murder. But the recorded conversations proved otherwise. Jonathan's voice, captured on James's insurance recordings, was clear and unmistakable. "I want this problem solved permanently. I don't care how you do it. Just make sure it can't be traced back to me." Daniel's mother, Elizabeth Mitchell, provided heartbreaking testimony about her son's character and dreams. The schoolteacher from Manchester, who had worked 2 jobs to put Daniel through university, broke down as she described learning of his death. "Daniel was a good boy who worked hard for everything he had." Elizabeth sobbed. "He sent me money every month to help with my medical bills. He didn't deserve to die because he fell in love with the wrong person." Victoria's sister, Lady Charlotte, was the only member of Victoria's family to attend the trial. The Ashford family, mortified by the scandal, had distanced themselves from the entire situation. Charlotte's testimony revealed years of concern about Victoria's unhappiness in her marriage to Jonathan. "Victoria told me she felt like a prisoner in a gilded cage," Charlotte testified. "Jonathan controlled everything, her schedule, her finances, her friendships. When she met Daniel, it was the first time in 15 years I saw my sister truly smile." The trial lasted 9 weeks, with testimony from over 60 witnesses and hundreds of pieces of evidence. The media coverage was relentless, with every detail of the case analyzed by legal experts and true crime commentators. The case highlighted issues of domestic control, class dynamics, and the question of whether Britain's elite truly faced the same justice as ordinary citizens. On June 28, 2024, the jury began their deliberations. They returned with a verdict after 14 hours. Judge Sir Malcolm Rutherford read the verdict in a courtroom so silent you could hear breathing. In the case of Regina versus Jonathan Ashford-Kent, James Carter and Associates, we find the defendants guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and 2 counts of murder in the first degree. Jonathan Ashford-Kent was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 35 years before parole eligibility. James Carter received life with a 30-year minimum. The 2 associates received 25 years each. The judge's sentencing remarks were scathing. "You believed your wealth and position placed you above the law," Sir Malcolm told Jonathan. "You treated your wife as property and her lover as disposable. You orchestrated their murders to protect your reputation and then attempted to evade justice through money and influence." This court sends a clear message that in Britain, no one is above the law. The convictions sent shockwaves through London's elite community. Several of Jonathan's business associates quietly resigned from their positions. His hedge fund collapsed within 6 months, wiping out billions in investments. The Belgravia mansion was seized by the courts and sold, with proceeds going to the victims' families. Daniel's mother, Elizabeth, used her portion of the settlement to establish a scholarship fund for working-class students from Manchester pursuing careers in finance, named the Daniel Mitchell Memorial Scholarship. It helps young people from humble backgrounds access opportunities that were once reserved for the privileged elite. Victoria's sister, Charlotte, became an advocate for domestic abuse awareness in wealthy families, using her position in society to speak about the hidden prisons that exist behind mansion doors. She established the Victoria Ashford-Kent Foundation, which provides resources and support for women trapped in controlling relationships. The Pimlico flat where the murders occurred was demolished, and the site was turned into a small public garden. A discrete memorial stone commemorates all victims of domestic violence, though it doesn't mention Victoria and Daniel by name. James Carter remains in HMP Belmarsh, where he has reportedly cooperated with authorities in investigating other cases involving London's elite families. His testimony has led to several additional investigations into crimes committed by those who believe their wealth protected them from consequences. The case of Victoria Ashford-Kent and Daniel Mitchell became a watershed moment in British criminal justice, proving that even the most powerful men in society cannot murder with impunity. Their tragic story exposed the dark reality that exists behind the elegant facades of Belgravia mansions and billion-pound hedge funds. In the end, 3 lives are destroyed by one man's inability to accept that his wife was a human being, not a possession. But their deaths were not in vain. They revealed that justice in Britain, when pursued with determination, applies equally to billionaires and schoolteachers' sons. The gilded cage had been broken, but the price of freedom was paid in blood, and the memory of that price continues to echo through the marble halls of London's elite society.